after an impromptu break for like a week or so there from videos from pretty much anybody on this channel, I think we're going to kind of start getting back into the flow of things now. And I'll be doing a lot of that stuff I've been talking about doing like forever now is finally coming to fruition. So we're going to have a whole bunch of stuff just kind of all in a row here. And we get to start that off with a couple of movies that came out this weekend. I guess we're going to start with Dark Phoenix. Supposedly the big end to this, well yeah, obviously it has to be with the whole murder thing now, but yeah, the last X-Men movie of this particular series being plural, who even cares anymore? The writers don't. I don't think anybody does. Especially since they've rehired Simon Kinberg, who did, he wrote like The Last Stand, and he wrote Apocalypse, and most notably recently, a lot of people were concerned about the choice of him because of his part of his responsibility in Josh Trank's Fantastic Four from 2015. So, Disaster is pretty close behind this guy, wherever he is, and I don't know what the consensus is on Apocalypse from most X-Men fans, but I know personally I really didn't care for it at all, despite the fact that it is a very, very, very long 2.5 hours. I often forget most of it. This is how we're going to go into this, and I guess Kinberg was saying this was like supposed to be his redemption, because he's like, oh, I really fucked up the whole Phoenix thing when we did The Last Stand, but this will be the good one. This will be where we really get it now. So he decided to do that by making a movie that doesn't even have the term X-Men in its title. So we're off to a really good start. And yeah, there is. It is jarring now, I notice, when this movie starts, after you get so used to the Marvel Studios logo, and you just see the regular Marvel logo. So just everything right off just feels weird. We don't get the usual opening credits that we usually do. Nothing of that sort whatsoever. We just start and jump directly to 1975. And I thought I was watching the opening of Shazam again, despite the fact this is the origin story of many movie characters, not necessarily just superheroes or supervillains or anything like that. The old sitting in the back seat of the car and the parents crash the car and die while you're in the back seat thing. So the creativity is just the jumping off point immediately. We're going in so many directions we haven't seen already. And eventually we see her get taken in by Xavier and all that, then go to the school, and then at some point we jump ahead to 1992. Which is kind of the theme here we've been sticking with, because we had the original movie in 2000, and then that series, but then when you go back to First Class, we're in the 60s, Days of Future Past, we're in the 70s, Apocalypse, we're in the 80s, so it's like, oh, we need one more to fill in the gap. And now we have this movie, which is not really gonna do much of anything to tell us we're in the 90s, unlike the other movies did with their decade. We're just gonna go right into it. And I say that as if it's a totally bad thing, but to their credit, this first scene with the shuttle is actually pretty well done. Where they go through the whole thing of, there's a lot of, teleportation. They're using Nightcrawler a lot. They got to use Quicksilver again, which is always great. And it's this whole scene that, because when you look at, superhero movies and comic movies now, it's basically feels like a contest that every single action scene, no matter where it is in the movie, is in some sort of competition to see how big it can get. And this is, interestingly enough, what they accomplish here is it's an action scene where time is of the essence, and it's set in space, in a space shuttle that's about to explode. Yet it doesn't feel like they're overdoing it in, like a large sort of factor. Where it almost, like, when you compare it to other big action scenes in superhero movies, it's almost... downplayed is a strong word, but it doesn't feel like it's trying really hard to be, like, super, super big. It takes more of, like, a suspense angle to it. And like I said, sort of a racing against the clock thing, which I really liked. So that was a really good start. It's one of those cases where a movie almost starts a little too good, and you're like, Okay, well, I've heard the reputation this movie has, so just how far downhill from this does it go, and how does it do that? Because you're not bad so far, with the exception of the really, cliche and boring origin of how she ended up at Xavier's school. But after this, we are shortly introduced to our villain. I use the word introduced lightly, because there's not a whole lot we know about these people. I mean, it's kind of a creepy shot when Chastain's standing there and they're like coming out of the trees in the dark and shit, and we're not quite sure what they look like or what they are yet, until they assume her form, like the Skrulls in Captain Marvel, basically. Only these ones are like, legit evil and bent on world domination or whatever. And immediately one of them takes to warn Jessica Chastain, and so forever for the rest of the movie, Jessica Chastain's our villain now. The whole wife character, whoever it was she was playing, we didn't get to know her at all because it doesn't matter whatsoever. The only thing we know is that she really gives a shit about what her dog's barking at. And then she is possessed by this thing, and then she tickles the husband to death. And that's... and that's how it's introduced that this is the big bad villain we're going to be dealing with. And they really do their best to make her seem like the big bad villain, because as if tickling a dude to death wasn't enough, like he's the Pillsbury Doughboy, now we got this second scene where she confronts a particular character and says something like, they're trying to do like the whole really evil villainy dialogue to really build up, because I guess that's all they have, because you're not really doing anything else to give any depth to this character, so they just have her say stuff like, oh, your language is really hard to understand, even more so when you're screaming, and then she like squeezes him to death or something. So that's kind of the height of our dialogue, as you can probably expect. But then, as it goes on, we do get to see them sort of interacting, and needless to say, it's not near as strong as it's probably been in past movies. It seems like ever since Mystique has been being played by Jennifer Lawrence, she just has this absolute obsession with names. Because we had the scene in First Class where it's like, oh, how did they all get their names? Oh, Mystique was just like, hey, your name should be this and that and that. And now she's worried about the fact that the women are starting to carry them in this particular storyline, so it's like, why are you calling it X-Men? Why not just call it X-Women at this point? And then if that's not enough of her obsessing over names, she's pissed off at Xavier for most of the movie, and finally gets to the point where it's like, you know why they call it X-Men, right? What do you think the X stands for? And it's like, Raven, get the fuck over everybody's names, please. That is all your dialogue is. So this is the reason Rebecca Romaine didn't have that many lines, I think. And when she did, hers weren't that great either. If we really remember correctly, so yeah, I guess it just comes with the character. At least that's probably what Kimberg's excuse is. Because you can see, this movie just feels like if you were to interview him as a writer and say, so about this part in the script and about this part in the script, I imagine it would just sort of be all excuses, sort of like, there's clearly freedom here now that Days of Future Past has brought in because the whole thing was kind of inconsistent to begin with. Pretty clearly. So there was that talk about when Days of Future Past came out and they brought time travel into it, and it's like, alright, this is basically their way of saying, we know the timeline's fucked, we know the continuity's fucked, so let's introduce time travel and fix it and make everything all better, and then we can have a new starting off point with some nice continuity going on. And it's like, no, you know what, actually, now that we've introduced multiple timelines, let's make the continuity even worse than it was before, because now we technically have an excuse. If there's something that doesn't line up to anything at all, we can just say timelines. And that's how we're going to deal with the writing from now on. So now we are free to do whatever the fuck we want. And what it is we really want is to just get to the end of our scripts as soon as possible. So we're going to write down the laziest shit we possibly can. Until Disney buys us and we don't have to do this anymore. So that's basically how the whole movie feels. And then we get some action scenes throughout, of course. A lot of them aren't near as well done as the space shuttle scenes, so we're going to have a lot of CGI. And the CGI is not exactly flawless. There's a lot of cases where when something happens that's clearly CGI, it's happening like quickly, which makes it look even worse than it may have already to begin with. Um, but I mean, every now and then there's still something nice. Like pretty much anytime Magneto does something or crushes something or whatever, everybody's crushing shit here. But Magneto especially has a really good knack for it. So it's got that going for it. There's a point in time where he pulls a subway out of the ground for not much of a reason. There were probably other ways to do whatever he was doing with that. But hey, as long as it looks cool, at least you have something. um, there was something else like that before. I can't remember exactly what it was now, but I remember specifically thinking, it's like, there's really no particular reason for this, but I mean, I suppose if it looks cool, you've at least got an excuse for its existence to an extent. Which is something you can't say about a lot of the other things in the movie. Well, I guess while we're on the subject of the action and the CGI, I will say that the ending is pretty well done also. The whole train thing. Especially since, to my understanding, that wasn't the original ending. They had to like reshoot it or something. It was going to be a lot bigger. But I actually think the train thing works. Especially since you go back to the little space shuttle thing where when you, once again, compare it to the size and scope you expect of action scenes in superhero movies, it's sort of nice to see it not necessarily feel like it has to go as big as possible. And that's kind of like, just confining this final action scene to this train is satisfying enough if it's done well enough. And for the most part, they are able to handle that pretty well. And it doesn't suffer too much from the whole, they're trying to do too much, so the more they do, the faker it looks and all that. So they do have that going for it. But there is something here, and every now and then there's like, a kill where they kind of go above and beyond, where Magneto does something where a hand impaling leads directly to a head impaling. That's really that's really kind of twisted. So it's got that going for it. But then you've got stuff like the ways they decide to raise the stakes or bring emotion into it. Which may mean, especially since we're dealing with the end of this era of X-Men movies, I guess, the idea of... obviously, without saying too much, there might be characters that don't make it out. But the issue with this is that this is the X-Men franchise. And killing characters off in this franchise has not been raising the stakes since, the second movie? Since X2. Because apart from Wolverine, obviously, nobody in this franchise ever fucking stays dead, ever. So every single time they have killed off a character that's not gonna... Wolverine had to go off and do his own damn thing in order to die in fucking peace. And stay that way. In these movies, every time they attempt to seemingly kill off a character, or maybe genuinely kill off a character, there's just nothing there anymore, because who's gonna believe it? Because you always find... It's like a terrible soap opera. A character will die, and they'll come back, and they might die again, but you'll find a way to bring them back again. So even when they're killing characters for real, it's like... You just don't feel anything, because you've been through this shit with other characters that have even more importance. And have more of a significance in the full story. And so it's like, every time this franchise kills somebody, it's like, does it matter? Does it really matter? And even if it turns out that it does matter, it's kind of worn off by that point. It doesn't matter by the time you realize it actually might. Because it just, once again, you just feel like the writers the whole time. Who fucking cares anyway? We're just gonna do whatever the hell we want anyway. So yeah, there's even the point in time when Xavier and Eric are having this somewhat of a standoff, and Xavier's doing his whole thing, and Eric just cuts him off, and he's like, you're gonna do the whole speech thing. Nobody cares anymore. Really, nobody cares. Whether that was Fassbender breaking script and just talking, I don't know. But either way, it says everything it needs to about the story itself and the direction everything has been going. So... the thing about this, though, is that I don't think, and this, I don't know. To be totally honest, I've never really found Jean in any of the versions of this to be that interesting of a character. I mean, there's an interesting concept there, and I'm sure in the source material and all the comics and all that, there's tons of stuff that goes into, especially with the whole how it starts with like this sort of like, just on a very surface level explanation. It's sort of like an internal conflict that can eventually turn into total disaster. To put it in the very simplest way, and there is something just inherently interesting about that. But going back and watching the other movies, even with an actress like Famke Janssen playing her, she's just never a character that I was drawn to really at all. So a story that basically sort of is supposed to be about her and surround her, especially with an actress that is just all around as uninteresting as Sophie Turner. And I know she's got a built-in fan base because of her damn show, but we saw that turned out. But that I've just never really found her that interesting either. So having her at the center of this is really not doing it that many favors. On top of the writing, on top of all that, just it's just there, whatever. And on top of all this, throughout basically the whole thing, it just feels so simple and pointless to the point that it's really hard to watch it feeling like it's like a big ending. This doesn't feel like the ending of jack shit. This feels like just some other, even, decent scenes like the whole train climax still feels like the set of, the end of a Fast and Furious movie or something. Just with more things getting crushed with people's minds and powers. So, yeah, just very sort of underwhelming, pretty much all over the place. We talked about this with Hellboy earlier this year. It's probably not as bad as you're hearing that it is, especially if you go in imagining it's going to be like one of the worst things ever. There's a really good chance you're not going to actually feel that way. But it's yeah, like I've noticed a lot in this particular franchise that there is because I was never the only real the only X movie that I like really love I think is Days of Future Past. And like I really like First Class. I really like the first movie and all that. But I was never X2. I always had trouble getting into. This was never a franchise that I was like really crazy, insane, passionate about. So obviously, when I say I'm underwhelmed by all this, it's really hard to even tell where my expectations were to begin with. Because I made the mistake of getting a little bit hyped about Apocalypse, and I just really didn't think much of it at all, good or bad, honestly. So yeah, this is just here. It exists, and it does have those moments in it. So I guess it's not entirely pointless. It's just like 95% pointless, if we're being generous. So, there it is. So let's go on. Speaking of pointless sequels, because that's just the theme, I guess. We're going to talk about The Secret Life of Pets 2 now, which is a movie that I kept forgetting was going to exist. The only reason I kept remembering it, and the only thing I associated with for the longest time, was, oh yeah, Louis C.K. got in trouble, so they replaced him with Patton Oswalt. And then, like, after that, I kept forgetting the movie was going to exist at some point. And then here it is, unceremoniously. Even though it's probably going to do just fine box office-wise, I'm sure. It just feels like it's just kind of here. So it's like, alright, you had the thrilling plot, if you want to call it that, of the first movie, which was harmless enough, but I mean, where do you go from that? And I know that's a really dangerous thing to ask an animation studio, but here we are, especially like Illumination, but here we are. So, obviously they're going to add a baby, because of course they are. His owner, Katie, I think it was, finds a dude, they get married, they have a kid, and then and then it's like, oh, they added a baby to it, well, we know where all this is going. And then it's like, oh, they're speeding things up, okay, so the baby actually grows up to be like a He's either a toddler or a little past that. They never really make that clear. I don't even think he speaks till the very end, but I'm pretty sure he's old enough to be. Um, and then he's, like a little hellraiser, and he tortures Max and everything, but then it's like, oh no, now that he's older, he loves the dog, and the dog loves him back, and they're, it's a boy and his dog story now, and it's like, okay, I can probably back that. It seems fine. But then this is just not the plot at all. Like, after all this, after Katie finds a dude, she gets married, they have a baby, that baby grows up, there's the whole arc of the baby and Max not getting along, then the baby and Max do get along. This is like the first 3 minutes, and then it barely has anything to do with all of this ever again. There is so much it wants to get to. There are 3 plots at least in this, all going on in different places with different characters. So, you've got the first portion where it's Max and the Eric Stone Street dog, whose name was Duke, I think. The only reason I really remember the tips thing off is his collar is just a big D. I'm going to assume. I'm pretty sure that's what it is Duke. They're going to go on a trip to a farm for a reason that I don't remember because it doesn't matter. And so he leaves behind his bee squeaky toy. This bee squeaky toy is like a major plot point. That's how important the storylines in this movie are. He leaves it with the Jenny Slate dog, who is Gidget, I believe. And he's like, this is the most important thing ever. Like, this is my holy grail. This is, like, my life were to end. I would go outside to a windowsill in this big city and leap off into traffic if you lost this bee squeaky toy. So she's like, alright, Max, you can count on me. So you know what's going to end up happening there. And then the third storyline involves Kevin Hart's bunny, who we, I'm sure, missed. Who was actually probably the highlight of the first movie, interestingly enough. Particularly, I still remember the whole thing with Ricky, the duck that was dead, that they had like a memorial to in his little place. And the snake that they killed repeatedly. All the memorable stuff from the first movie comes from Kevin Hart's bunny, so I can't hate on Snowball too much. Except for the fact that now they have this inane thing going on where he thinks he's a superhero because his owner is, like, weirdly fixated on a superhero TV show. It's like the beginning of Jingle All the Way fucking Turbo Man is basically what she's watching. There's, like, this one segment where it goes into, like, this somewhat, like, I don't know exactly what you'd call it, but, like, a more traditional animation where it's like him actually pretending he's a superhero, which is brief and kind of pointless. The only purpose this whole superhero thing serves is, number one, he's wearing that little superhero getup the whole time, even when he makes pizza rolls. And secondly, I guess this gives him the courage to go into his own plot, which I really don't even remember how the hell he ended up in this plot, and I just saw the movie. But there's like an evil circus with an evil dude who puts on this circus, who has a kidnapped tiger, this little innocent white tiger, and he has to save the tiger from the captivity of this circus and its evil owner. And when I saw the evil owner, he's got like a Judge Doom hat, and he's got like, the collar, and it's like, oh, who did they get to voice this guy? Yeah, they must have gotten, like a, Benicio del Toro type or a Christoph Waltz type or something. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot, Secret Life of Pets, they don't give a fuck, it's Nick Kroll. Yay. But, despite my saying that, there are new voice actors here. I mean, there's some of the obvious, like Tiffany Haddish, because of fucking course Tiffany Haddish was going to be in this. And that's the only purpose she serves, is she's like, hey, everybody recognizes my voice, and I'm still popular right now, I think. So, because that's just the way Hollywood works, my voice is in this movie. That's the only purpose I serve. And then you've got to have the moment where we're jumping around here, now we're back to the farm, where Max is, and Max is going to have this big old story arc, I guess, where he finds courage or something? I don't know. There is a bigger dog named Rooster, voiced by Harrison Ford. And I did know that Harrison Ford was playing a character named Rooster going into this, but silly me, I assumed it was like an actual rooster. Which honestly, a rooster with Harrison Ford's voice, maybe I'm wrong, but that sounds funny as hell to me. But no, this movie needed another dog. Because it's, as we talked about, it's bursting with creativity. We'll just give it another dog. And then he does that. He's like a mentor, I guess, to what objective? I don't fucking know. It's this farm storyline and Max finding this sort of arc here ends so abruptly and serves pretty much no purpose whatsoever that when he actually goes back home before the climax has happened, Snowball actually says to him, "What are you doing here? Why are you back from the farm so early?" And I don't think that's the movie being self-aware. I think they just flat out did not know what else to do with that farm thing. They had him hanging off a cliff once. He saves like a sheep. That's what he does there. And that's about it. It looks like a deleted scene from Hoodwinked or something. This movie wishes it was as funny as Hoodwinked, and take that for whatever you want. Take it as an insult or a compliment. I don't care. That's what we're dealing with here. So Duke gets pretty much pushed to the side here. I'm not even sure what Eric Stonestreet is doing here. I'm sure the paycheck wasn't enough to bring him here for his, however many lines that it was. But yeah, so that character's kind of pretty much pushed off to the side. So we have those characters, but when you talk about the people that are the voice cast in this, you think about Patton Oswalt replacing Louis C.K. Now, Patton Oswalt has, gone into some interesting territory, particularly in his stand-up. And he's got an interesting bit where he talks about how he's, got such that cynical state of mind and all that, and how weird and just out of his, own mind it was to have to do the press tour for Ratatouille back when it came out, and how just not his scene that was whatsoever, and he had to keep fighting off the fucked up thoughts. And so, interestingly enough, though, he seems like such a safe option here now, because one of the more interesting things about the first movie was the casting of Louis C.K. as Max. Because it's not like he tried to sneak things in there that were dirty, and it's not like the character's necessarily a play on him, but just knowing that Louis C.K. was a part of this and brought himself down to this children's animated movie was kind of surreal. It was just surreal to hear his voice, knowing the things that voice has said in the context of that movie with that character. And he did sort of, fit the neurotic personality of Max, which kind of goes into overdrive in the first part of this movie. It's not a trait that stays. It's only there when it's convenient. When he's there in the vet, and the movie doesn't really go and use the potential of its opportunities as much as it should, like when we see all the different animals in the vet's office. Just lasts for a second. But I kept watching this wondering, how different would this character feel if that was Louis C.K.'s voice? Because I feel like it would make a difference. Even if it was the same lines, I don't know. But Patton Oswalt pretty much found, and this is nothing against him either, it was just his voice is just so, yeah, I guess it fits, bland, that it's he's basically screaming into the microphone, "I'm the replacement actor." So yeah, it just kind of felt like there was something missing there. And then, yeah, like I was saying, there's multiple climaxes because we have a lot of things going on here. The whole thing about the bee squeaky toy is that it somehow ends up out the window and into the apartment of a bunch of cats. So she has to pretend to be a cat so she can go down there incognito and get it. But then this kind of converges with the climax of Snowball's story with the tiger, which of course Max is conveniently returned for just in time. And so it's you get the whole scene where it's him and Harrison Ford, howling at the moon, and you're oh, Max has reached an arc or something, so this is the end of the movie now. And you're oh yeah, I forgot, the whole tiger thing hasn't been resolved. Not only did I forget it hasn't been resolved, I forgot it existed entirely. So, this is why you get a voice actor more interesting than Nick Kroll. So it's you could have remembered that somebody else was in this movie, and it would have kept the climax that we are coming to in your head, but no, it just kind of sneaks up on you. It's like, oh yeah, we got like 20 minutes to go. And it's like, oh yeah, it can't just be, ending on a farm, howling at the moon, and finding your place with Harrison Ford. No, it's an Illumination movie today, so it's got to have action in it. Even fucking Sing found a way to put action in it and a car chase in it. It reminds me, I would say the worst offender of this of all time is probably always going to be how they managed to get a car chase in the Lorax. But, but yeah, that's just what animated movies in general do now. So, yep, movie ends with an action climax. And ends up with, all the familiar, like, because I remember every now and then there was something funny in the sense that it was just so out there in the first movie, whether it be the whole Ricky thing, the killing the snake thing, that whole I vaguely remember something with a lot of sausage. Whether it be like, I can't remember if it was like a dream sequence or a fantasy sequence or what, but I remember it being weird. And in that movie, being such a straightforward, animated kids movie, like in one ear out the other sort of thing, weird shit is welcome. And something like that, just to break the monotony. And here, there's just not really any of that. And even the comedy, when it's trying to be funny, just feels so incredibly out of date. Like something that should have long since been... Because here's the idea of... This is the creativity just bursting at the seams out of this movie. You've probably seen on the posters, dog with the cone around his head. Brand new source of comedy here. After he goes to the vet, he has that and he has to deal with it. Hilarity ensues. Then we've got the whole thing of, oh, aren't the things that cats do so hilarious? So it's like either this writer either just started watching cat videos on YouTube or just started owning a cat themselves. Because it's like, the cat's playing with the doorstop. Ah! The cat has catnip and it's like he's high. Hilarious. It's all new. And it's just all of that. And that's basically the kind of humor that the movie basically, like, lives off of. So... There's nothing here. There's really nothing here whatsoever. It just exists. And it's like, I can't even be, like, particularly mad at it. Because it just doesn't, induce that enough passion to even do that. It's just here. It just exists. And that's it. So, there it is in all of its pointless glory. Both of these. So, this was eventful. Next week is Men in Black, I think. And... that Shaft movie that I have no idea what to think of, that I only learned the existence of, like, not that long ago. And I guess it's, like, a combination of Richard Roundtree and Samuel Jackson, but it's like it's like the director of, like, The Ride-Along Guy or something did it. After Singleton's movie with Jackson from 2000, there was, like, this actual brutal crime movie. I don't know what the hell that is, but I'm interested to find out. And cautiously optimistic, I guess. There's also Late Night, which I really don't know if I'm interested in or not, but I guess I'll find out when the time comes, and then that'll be what's coming. So like I said, all that other stuff is coming as well. I talked about there's like 2 verses, there's a franchise video, there's a Twilight Zone thing. Season 2 of Big Little Lies starts Sunday, so I'll probably do that from episode to episode, because I'm sure it'll be much more interesting than the Twilight Zone has been, so it'll be easier to stick to, I'm sure. And probably something else I'm forgetting because there's so much now. But yes, so that's what we're looking forward to, if you want to call it that, here. So until all of that stuff, that's it.